We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now let's dive into today's story. The gentle hum of the dishwasher provided a rhythmic backdrop as Martin Munoz stood at the kitchen window, watching his wife of 13 years walk to her car. Something about the way Tiffany moved caught his attention. There was a lightness to her step that he hadn't seen in years, reminiscent of their early dating days. Her carefully chosen outfit, a fitted athleisure set that hugged her CrossFit-toned body, was a far cry from the comfortable leggings and oversized sweaters she used to wear to her Thursday book club meetings. Martin's fingers tapped absently against his coffee mug as he tracked her progress down the driveway. The steam from his drink fogged up his glasses, but he didn't move to wipe them clean. Instead, he focused on memorizing details. The way she checked her reflection in the car window, the careful adjustment of her hair, the quick glance at her phone that made her smile. Book club again? Their neighbor, Mrs. Chun, called out from her garden. She was always out there, tending to her prized roses, seeing everything. Yes, Tiffany answered, her voice carrying a note of excitement that made Martin's stomach tighten. We're discussing modern love tonight. Such fascinating perspectives on contemporary relationships. Mrs. Chin's knowing look wasn't lost on Martin as she bent back to her roses. She'd been their neighbor for all 13 years of their marriage, had watched them move in as newlyweds, had brought them soup when they both got COVID in 2020. She saw things, noticed patterns just like he did. Inside his pocket, Martin's phone buzzed. A notification from their shared credit card account. $75 at Sephora, purchased 2 hours ago. He remembered when Tiffany used to ask his opinion about new makeup, modeling different lipstick shades and laughing at his confused attempts to tell the difference between cherry red and ruby rouge. Now, her makeup appeared as if by magic, subtle changes he was supposed to pretend not to notice. The sound of her car starting pulled him from his thoughts. Through the window, he watched her back out of the driveway, noting how she checked her reflection one last time in the rearview mirror before driving away. The book club meetings had been getting progressively later over the past few months. What had once been a 7 to 9 p.m. commitment now regularly stretched past 11. Martin walked to his home office, settling into the chair that had molded itself to his form through countless hours of work as a cybersecurity consultant. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered logging into their shared cloud storage. It would be easy, too easy, to check her location history, to verify if she was really at Sandra's house where the book club supposedly met. Not yet, he murmured to himself, pulling his hands back. Trust but verify, that was the mantra he'd learned in his line of work. And verification required patience, planning, and proper documentation. Instead, he pulled up their shared calendar, noting the increasing frequency of CrossFit sessions marked in bright orange. The gym had become her second home over the past 6 months, her enthusiasm for fitness reaching new heights after years of casual exercise. Martin hadn't thought much of it at first. They were both approaching 40, and health was important. But now, patterns were emerging that he couldn't ignore. His phone buzzed again, this time with a text from their friend Holly. Hey Martin, quick question. Did Tiffany switch book clubs? Saw her at Copper Cup Coffee today when I was supposed to be meeting her in Sandra's group. Different location? Martin's fingers tightened around his phone. Holly was one of their oldest friends, part of the original book club that had met faithfully at Sandra's house every Thursday for the past 5 years. Must be a special meeting location this week. He typed back, the lie tasting bitter. I'll ask her about it when she gets home. Holly's response came quickly. Oh, okay. Just curious since I saw her with some people I didn't recognize, including that new guy from her gym, Rick or Ricky something. The name hit Martin like a physical blow. Ricky Mead, the charismatic real estate developer who had started showing up at their social gatherings about 3 months ago. Martin minimized his chat with Holly and pulled up Facebook, finding Ricky's profile with ease. His timeline was filled with CrossFit achievements, motivational quotes about living your best life, and carefully staged photos of luxury real estate listings. A new post caught Martin's attention, a group photo from Tiffany's gym, posted just 2 hours ago. There she was, standing next to Ricky, both of them flushed and smiling after what the caption called an intense partner WOD. Martin zoomed in on the image, noting the way Ricky's hand rested just above Tiffany's hip, how her body angled toward him naturally, their shared smile holding a secret the camera had inadvertently captured. The upcoming weekend loomed in Martin's mind. Their friends Jack and Diana's anniversary party. Everyone would be there, including Ricky and his wife Merle. Martin had met Merle only twice, but something about her sharp attorney's mind and observant nature had left an impression. He wondered if she saw what he was seeing, if she too was collecting pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to complete. His computer chimed with a calendar reminder. Wedding anniversary, 6 months? Martin stared at the notification, remembering how Tiffany had forgotten their anniversary last year for the first time in their marriage. She'd been distracted. She'd said busy with work and the gym and book club. He'd accepted her apology dinner, eaten the slightly overcooked pasta, and pretended not to notice how she checked her phone every few minutes throughout the meal. The sound of Mrs. Chin's garden shears snipping away at her roses drifted through the window. Martin walked over and watched her methodical progress through her garden, each cut precise and purposeful. She looked up, catching his eye, and gave him a sad smile that said more than words could convey. In that moment, Martin knew he wasn't the only one who had noticed the changes in Tiffany, the subtle shifts that added up to something he wasn't quite ready to name. His computer chimed again. An email notification. Subject, anniversary party reminder. Saturday, 7 p.m. Martin clicked it open, scanning the details he already knew by heart. As he reached the bottom, his eyes caught on the RSVP list. There was Tiffany's name, with a +1 noted beside it, as if she were single. A simple clerical error, probably, but it sent a chill down his spine, nonetheless. The sun was setting now. In a few hours, Tiffany would return home, cheeks flushed with what she'd claim was wine and intellectual discussion. She'd kiss his cheek, shower away the evidence of her evening, and slip into bed with a new book about modern relationships or personal growth. And Martin would lie beside her, counting the minutes until she checked her phone one last time, pretending to sleep as the screen's blue light illuminated her secret smile. But for now, he sat in his darkening office, watching as Mrs. Chin covered her roses for the night, each protective cloth placed with the same care she'd shown in pruning them. Sometimes Martin realized the best way to protect something was to watch it closely, to notice every change, every sign of disease or distress. And sometimes, the kindest cut was the one that removed the infected parts before they could spread. Artisanal wooden tables of the daily grind, an upscale cafe deliberately chosen for its location across town from their usual haunts. Martin arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered a clear view of both entrances while providing enough privacy for a delicate conversation. His cybersecurity training had taught him the value of controlling your environment, even for something as seemingly casual as a coffee meeting. He watched Merle Green's arrival with professional appreciation. The family law attorney moved through the space like someone accustomed to being observed, her tailored charcoal suit and precise movement speaking of someone who understood the power of presentation. She spotted him immediately, navigating between tables with purpose. Her leather briefcase held close like it contained state secrets. Perhaps it did. "Thank you for meeting me, Martin," Merle said, settling into the chair opposite him. Her voice was controlled, measured, the kind of voice that could deliver devastating news with professional detachment. "I ordered a cappuccino at the counter. I hope you don't mind if we wait until it arrives before we begin." Martin nodded, taking a sip of his own black coffee. "Of course. I appreciate you reaching out, though I have to admit, I'm curious about the reason." Merle's eyes flickered to the barista calling out drink orders, then back to Martin. "Patience is a virtue in our respective fields, isn't it? You in cybersecurity, me in family law, we both know the value of waiting for the right moment." The casual mention of his profession wasn't lost on Martin. Merle had done her homework, just as he had done his. A quick LinkedIn search before the meeting had revealed her impressive track record in high-profile divorce cases, particularly those involving infidelity and hidden assets. The barista approached with Merle's cappuccino, the foam decorated with an intricate leaf pattern. They waited until he was out of earshot before Merle spoke again, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm going to be direct, Martin, because I respect your intelligence and your time. Our spouses are having an affair." The words hung in the air between them, heavy despite their quiet delivery. Martin studied Merle's face, noting the slight tension around her eyes, the way her fingers gripped her cup just a fraction too tightly. "You have evidence?" he asked, his tech background automatically shifting to questions of documentation and verification. Merle reached for her briefcase, extracting a slim tablet. "I'm a family law attorney, Martin. Gathering evidence is what I do." She swiped through several screens before turning the tablet toward him. Bank statements showing matching charges at hotels and restaurants. Phone records indicating calls and texts at suspicious hours. Gym surveillance footage that shows them arriving early and leaving late, often within minutes of each other. Martin leaned forward, his coffee forgotten as he studied the meticulous documentation. Each piece of evidence was dated, annotated, and cross-referenced. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, his professional appreciation warring with personal devastation. "It needs to be," Merle replied, taking back the tablet. "Ricky thinks he's clever, using cash for some transactions, deleting texts. But he forgets I've built a career on catching people exactly like him." She paused, taking a careful sip of her cappuccino. "The question is, what do you want to do with this information?" Martin sat back, his mind racing through scenarios and implications. "Why are you showing me this? You could have handled your divorce without involving me." A sharp smile crossed Merle's face, reminding Martin of a predator showing its teeth. "Because I believe in strategic partnerships, Martin. And because my husband needs to learn that actions have consequences." She leaned forward, lowering her voice further. "You have skills I could use: digital forensics, cyber tracking. I have legal expertise and documentation you might find valuable. Together, we could build cases that neither of them could contest." "You're proposing we work together?" Martin asked, though he already knew the answer. His mind was already cataloging the digital tools at his disposal, the legal ways he could monitor and document suspicious activities. "I'm proposing we be smart about this," Merle corrected, pulling out a business card and sliding it across the table. "Your wife has been careless, Martin. She leaves her social media logged in on shared devices, uses easily guessable passwords, shares her location without thinking about who might be tracking it. Ricky's the same way. All confidence, no caution." Martin picked up the card, noting the weight of the expensive paper, the embossed lettering that spoke of success and authority. "And what exactly would this partnership entail?" Merle pulled out a legal pad, her movements precise and practiced. "First, we document everything legally and thoroughly. I can guide you on what evidence will hold up in court. Phone records, financial transactions, social media activity. Second, we build our cases quietly. They think they're being clever, but they're leaving digital breadcrumbs everywhere." "And then?" Martin asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Then we wait for the right moment," Merle said, her smile turning predatory. "They'll make a mistake. They always do. And when they do, we'll be ready with evidence so comprehensive, so irrefutable, that their only option will be to accept whatever terms we offer." The cafe had grown busier around them, the morning crowd seeking their caffeine, fix oblivious to the strategies being planned in their midst. Martin watched a young couple at a nearby table, their hands intertwined, their faces glowing with the kind of love he remembered feeling for Tiffany. "I'll need time to think about this," he said finally, pocketing Merle's card. "Of course," she replied, beginning to pack up her materials. "But don't take too long. Evidence has a way of disappearing, and they're getting bolder. That anniversary party this weekend? Watch how they interact. Watch how Tiffany looks at him, how Ricky finds excuses to be near her. Sometimes seeing it with your own eyes makes the decision easier." As they stood to leave, Merle paused, her hand resting lightly on her briefcase. "One more thing, Martin. Whatever you decide, remember that knowledge is power. Right now, we know about them, but they don't know we know. That advantage won't last forever." Martin watched her walk away, her heels clicking purposefully on the hardwood floor. Through the cafe window, he saw her slide into a luxury sedan, the kind of car that spoke of successful divorce settlements and high-profile clients. His phone buzzed, a text from Tiffany. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Book club tomorrow." Martin stared at the message, noting the careful casualness of her words, the way she was building alibis without realizing he could see through them. He pulled out Merle's card again, running his thumb over the embossed letters of her name and title. In his line of work, Martin had learned that security breaches often happen not because of sophisticated attacks, but because people grew careless, comfortable in their routines, and convinced of their invisibility. As he walked to his car, he began mentally cataloging the digital tools at his disposal, the monitoring software he could legally install, the backups he could create of their shared cloud storage. Knowledge was power, Merle had said, and Martin knew better than most how much knowledge was floating around in the digital ether, waiting to be discovered by someone who knew where to look. The soft blue light of multiple monitors cast an ethereal glow across Martin's home office as he methodically built his case. The wall-mounted screens displayed various windows, security camera feeds, cloud storage backups, financial transactions, and social media activity. Each piece of evidence was carefully logged, time-stamped, and categorized in a system that would make any forensic investigator proud. Through one monitor, he watched Tiffany in their garden, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. Her free hand gestured animatedly as she spoke, unaware of the high-definition camera recording her every movement. Martin adjusted his headphones, fine-tuning the audio pickup. "Can't just keep meeting like this, Ricky." Tiffany's voice came through clearly, thanks to the directional microphone he'd installed last week. "People will start to notice." Martin's not stupid. Martin's fingers flew across his keyboard, logging the time and content of the conversation. In another window, he pulled up their shared cloud storage, noting several recently deleted articles about polyamory and ethical non-monogamy. He'd already backed everything up, of course. The moment Tiffany had started researching these topics, he'd implemented a comprehensive backup system that preserved every digital footprint. His phone buzzed with a text from Merle. "Check your email." Found something interesting in Ricky's credit card statements. Opening his encrypted email client, Martin downloaded the attachments Merle had sent. Hotel charges, restaurant receipts, and most damning, a jewelry store purchase from last week. He added these to his growing documentation, each piece fitting into a larger puzzle of betrayal. The garden camera showed Tiffany ending her call, quickly typing something on her phone. Moments later, Martin's own phone lit up with a message. "Going to be late tonight. Extra training session at the gym." "Don't wait up." Martin's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered his response. "Keep it casual," he reminded himself. "No problem." "Have fun," he typed, adding a neutral smiley face emoji. As soon as the message showed as delivered, he switched back to his monitoring setup. On another screen, he pulled up the CrossFit Gym's public calendar. No extra training sessions were scheduled for tonight. He added this discrepancy to his growing spreadsheet of inconsistencies, each one meticulously dated and time-stamped. The document had grown significantly over the past month, a digital chronicle of subtle lies and careful deceptions. "Your wife's getting sloppy," Merle had told him during their last coffee meeting. "She's leaving too many digital breadcrumbs. It's like she wants to get caught." The thought made Martin pause his typing. He leaned back in his chair, studying the various feeds and windows before him. Their shared iPad had become a goldmine of information. Tiffany frequently forgot to clear her browsing history or log out of her accounts. Recent searches revealed a pattern. How to tell your husband you want an open marriage, ethical non-monogamy success stories, modern relationships breaking free. A notification popped up on one of his monitors. Movement detected in their driveway. The security camera showed Tiffany loading her gym bag into her car. Martin watched as she checked her reflection in the car window, applying a fresh coat of lipstick, something she'd never bothered with for previous gym sessions. His phone buzzed again, this time with an email alert. Another charge on their shared credit card. A booking at the Waterfront Hotel's restaurant for tonight. Not the gym, then. He added this to his evidence folder, making sure to capture screenshots of both the restaurant booking and Tiffany's text about the supposed training session. As he worked, Martin's mind wandered to their early dating days. Tiffany had been so direct then, so honest about what she wanted. They'd built their relationship on that foundation of transparency, or so he'd thought. Now, watching her drive away through his network of cameras, he wondered when exactly the lies had begun. His attention was drawn to movement on another monitor, their shared cloud storage updating in real time. Tiffany was deleting more files, unaware that everything was being automatically backed up to Martin's secure server. This time it was screenshots of conversations about relationship anarchy and breaking free from traditional constraints. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here she was, championing honesty and ethical non-monogamy in her online discussions, while simultaneously orchestrating an elaborate web of deception. Martin opened one of the deleted articles, titled Modern Love, Breaking Free from Monogamy's Chains, and began to read. Understanding your opponent's mindset was crucial in any strategic operation. His phone chimed with another message from Merle. Got the gym surveillance footage you requested. You need to see this. Sending secure link. Martin clicked the link, entering his encryption key to access the files. Multiple video clips showed Tiffany and Ricky arriving at the gym within minutes of each other, despite signing up for different class times. Their body language in the footage was telling. Lingering touches, shared laughs, the kind of comfortable intimacy that comes from more than just being workout partners. Keep documenting everything, Merle had insisted during their last meeting. Every lie, every inconsistency, every deleted message. We need to build an airtight case. Martin glanced at the framed photo on his desk. Him and Tiffany on their honeymoon, both smiling genuinely at the camera. It seemed like a lifetime ago. He turned the frame face down and returned to his work, adding more entries to his documentation. 6:15 p.m., text claiming extra training session at gym. 6:17 p.m., waterfront hotel restaurant charge, $180 reservation. 6:20 p.m., deleted browser history showing searches for how to suggest open marriage. 6:25 p.m., security footage shows subject leaving house after applying makeup. 6:30 p.m., location tracking shows subject heading downtown, opposite direction from gym. In another window, he monitored their shared Netflix account. Tiffany's recently watched list included several documentaries about polyamory and modern relationships. He noted how she'd started watching them during her supposed book club meetings, the timestamps matching perfectly with her absences from home. The garden security camera activated again. Mrs. Chun was out with her roses, as usual. Martin watched as she looked up at Tiffany's departing car, then toward his office window. Their eyes met briefly before she returned to her gardening. Her roses were particularly beautiful this year. He noticed, each bloom carefully tended and protected. There was something to be learned from that, he thought, the importance of patience, of careful cultivation, of knowing exactly when to make the cut. As the sun began to set, Martin continued his methodical documentation. Each piece of evidence was a pixel in a larger picture, one that became clearer with every passing day. He thought about what Merle had said about strategic partnerships and consequences. The time for action would come, but for now his job was to watch, document, and wait. On his main monitor, a new notification appeared, another message from their shared cloud storage. Tiffany had uploaded a new document, workshop_ideas_modern_relationships.docs. Martin added it to his growing collection of evidence, a slight smile playing at his lips. Sometimes the best strategy was simply to let your opponent think they were winning, all while documenting their every move. The office grew darker as night fell, but Martin continued his work, surrounded by the soft glow of his monitors. Each click, each screenshot, each save file was another piece of evidence in what was becoming an overwhelming case. He thought about Merle's words about patience and strategic timing. The evidence was mounting, the documentation growing more damning by the day. Soon, very soon, it would be time to put it all to use. The kitchen's stainless steel appliances gleamed in the morning light as Martin methodically prepared his coffee. Through his carefully positioned security cameras, he watched Tiffany setting up her phone on the granite countertop, adjusting the angle just so. Her newly acquired ring light cast an artificial glow across her features as she checked her appearance one final time. Over the past few weeks, Martin had witnessed his wife's transformation into what she called a relationship content creator. Their home had become her studio, every surface a potential backdrop for her growing social media presence. The kitchen, with its modern design and natural lighting, had become her favorite spot for live streams. Good morning, beautiful souls. Tiffany's voice took on that particular tone she used for her followers. Warm, intimate, with just a hint of practiced wisdom. I'm so excited to share something amazing with you all today. Martin kept his back turned, seemingly absorbed in his coffee preparation. Through the kitchen's reflective surfaces, he could see her TikTok interface displaying growing numbers as viewers joined the morning live stream. Comments scrolled past. "Good morning, Queen. Love your content. You've changed my life." You know how I've been talking about expanding our understanding of love and relationships? Tiffany continued, her voice taking on that philosophical tone she'd perfected. "Well, I've had the most incredible breakthrough in my own journey." The coffee maker gurgled, and Martin reached for his favorite mug. The one Tiffany had given him on their 10th anniversary, now 3 years past. The irony wasn't lost on him. So many of you have been asking about how to approach your partners about opening up your relationships, Tiffany was saying, her voice filled with barely contained excitement. About breaking free from the chains of traditional monogamy and exploring new paradigms of love. The comments section exploded with encouragement. Martin watched through his peripheral vision as Tiffany basked in the attention, her fingers occasionally scrolling through the praise. "Well, my beautiful community, I want to share something vulnerable with you today." She paused for dramatic effect, a technique she'd been perfecting in her recent videos. "I just had the most amazing conversation with my husband." Martin's hand tightened around his coffee mug. They hadn't had any conversation, amazing or otherwise, in days. Their interactions had been limited to brief exchanges about household logistics and carefully crafted text messages. He's so evolved, so understanding about exploring new relationship paradigms. Tiffany continued, her voice carrying that breathless quality she used when building up to a big revelation. The comment section lit up again. "You're so lucky. Relationship goals. We need more evolved men like this. Can't wait to hear his perspective." Martin watched his wife's performance through the security camera feed on his phone, noting how she'd positioned herself to catch the morning light just so, how she'd chosen to wear the blue top he'd once told her brought out her eyes. The same blue she'd worn to recent gym sessions with Ricky. "It's so important to have these open, honest conversations with our partners," Tiffany was saying, her hands making elegant gestures she'd practiced in front of their bedroom mirror. "To create space for growth and expansion in our relationships." The coffee maker finished its cycle with a final hiss. Martin turned, coffee pot in hand, deliberately stepping into the frame of Tiffany's live stream. He watched her eyes widen slightly. She hadn't expected him to be visible in her shot. "Since we're sharing with your followers," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the kitchen, "why don't you tell them about Ricky?" The effect was immediate. Tiffany's carefully composed expression faltered, her practiced smile freezing in place. The comments section exploded. "Wait, who's Ricky? OMG, what's happening? Is this live? Did he just... I don't know what you're talking about," Tiffany stammered, her social media persona cracking. She reached for her phone, but her usually graceful movements were jerky, panicked. "Oh, I think you do," Martin continued, his voice remaining calm. "Your followers seem very interested in honest conversations about modern relationships. Why don't we have one right now?" The comments were flowing so fast they became almost unreadable. "This is intense. Someone screen record this. Tea is being served. Who is Ricky?" Tiffany's fingers fumbled with her phone, trying to end the live stream. We could talk about this later, but isn't this what you wanted?" Martin took a slow sip of his coffee. An open, honest conversation about expanding relationship horizons, about breaking free from traditional constraints. The color had drained from Tiffany's face, her carefully applied makeup now stark against her pale skin. The ring light continued to cast its unforgiving glow, capturing every micro-expression of panic that crossed her features. "Not like this," she whispered, finally managing to end the live stream. The kitchen plunged into natural light, the artificial glow of her ring light now seeming harsh and theatrical. Martin set his coffee mug down carefully. "Isn't it interesting," he mused, "how some people confuse honesty with performance? How they mistake public proclamations for genuine communication?" Tiffany's phone was buzzing continuously now, notifications pouring in from her various social media accounts. Her followers were already clipping, sharing, and dissecting the moment. In their city's relatively small, modern relationships community, The video was spreading like wildfire. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice small, all traces of her confident online persona gone. "Long enough to appreciate the irony of you preaching about ethical non-monogamy while sneaking around with a married man." Martin picked up his coffee mug again. "Your followers seem very interested in authenticity and transparency. I wonder how they'll feel about this particular lesson in modern relationships." Through the kitchen window, he could see Mrs. Chun in her garden, methodically pruning her roses. She looked up, meeting his eyes briefly, and gave him a small nod. In the growing morning light, her roses seemed to glow with their own inner fire, each bloom perfectly positioned, each thorn carefully preserved. Tiffany's phone continued to buzz with notifications. She stared at the screen, watching as her carefully constructed online identity began to unravel in real time. Comments and direct messages poured in, the tone shifting from supportive to questioning to outright hostile. "You don't understand," she began, but Martin cut her off. "Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been using these ideas about modern relationships and ethical non-monogamy to justify your affair. I understand that you've been building a following based on concepts you don't actually practice. And I understand that right now, your followers are beginning to understand too." He turned to leave the kitchen, pausing in the doorway. "By the way, I signed up for your workshop next week. The one about transparent communication in modern relationships. I have some questions I'd like to ask in front of your community." As he walked away, he could hear Tiffany's phone continuing to buzz, each notification another crack in the carefully constructed facade she'd built. Through his own phone, he watched her on the security feed as she slumped against the kitchen counter, her ring light still casting its merciless glow across her face, illuminating the moment her performance finally fell apart. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Martin settled into a front row seat, precisely 15 minutes before the scheduled start of Tiffany's workshop. He'd chosen his position carefully, close enough to be impossible to ignore, but not so central as to appear confrontational. Around him, other attendees filtered in, many of them clutching notebooks emblazoned with phrases like "love without limits" and "breaking free." Through the glass door, he watched Tiffany's arrival. She faltered slightly upon seeing him, her step losing its usual confident swagger. The video from her live stream had been circulating for days now, spawning countless discussions in local social media groups. Her usual polished appearance seemed slightly frayed at the edges, her makeup a touch too heavy, her smile a fraction too wide. "Welcome, everyone," Tiffany's voice carried across the room, only a slight tremor betraying her nerves. "Today we're discussing how to communicate openly with your partner about expanding your relationship horizons." Martin watched as she scanned the room, noting how her gaze skipped over him like a stone across water. The other attendees, mostly younger couples and single women in their 30s, looked at her with that particular mix of admiration and curiosity reserved for social media influencers seen in the wild. "Before we begin," Tiffany continued, shuffling her notes, "I'd like to welcome a special guest. Dr. Gail Bishop is a renowned relationship therapist who's been featured in several of my videos." Martin noticed how she emphasized the connection, drawing on Gail's credibility. The therapist sat in the corner, her professional demeanor and sharp eyes suggesting she was here for more than just support. "Now, let's talk about the foundations of ethical non-monogamy," Tiffany said, hitting her stride. "The most important element is—" Martin's hand shot up, cutting through her momentum. "I have a question about transparency." The room grew still. Several participants who had seen the viral video shifted in their seats, smartphones discreetly emerging from pockets and bags. "In your experience," Martin continued, his voice calm and measured, "should you tell your partner about wanting an open relationship before or after you've already started seeing someone else?" The silence that followed was absolute. Tiffany's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush creeping up her neck. In the corner, Dr. Bishop leaned forward, her professional interest clearly piqued. That's... Tiffany stumbled over her words, her usual eloquence deserting her. "Actually," Dr. Bishop's clear voice cut through the tension, "that's a crucial point about ethical non-monogamy. It requires complete honesty from the start. Anything else is just cheating with extra steps. The therapist's words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the room. Several attendees began whispering among themselves, connecting dots between Martin's question, the viral video, and Tiffany's current discomfort. Perhaps, Martin suggested, his tone helpful, you could share your personal experience with the group about how you approach these conversations in your own relationship. Tiffany's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her note cards. We should focus on the theoretical framework first. But isn't personal experience valuable? Another attendee chimed in, her voice eager. You always talk about learning from real-life examples in your videos. Dr. Bishop's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, Tiffany. Your insights about maintaining transparency while exploring new relationship dynamics would be particularly relevant here. The room's attention focused laser-sharp on Tiffany, whose composure was cracking visibly. Her carefully constructed image as a relationship guru was dissolving under the weight of actual scrutiny. I think we should take a short break, she announced, her voice strained. 5 minutes, everyone? As participants filed out for refreshments, Dr. Bishop approached Martin. Fascinating dynamic you've introduced to the discussion, she observed quietly. Though I suspect this isn't just academic interest on your part. Martin smiled slightly. Let's just say I have a personal stake in understanding how theory translates to practice. When the session resumed, Tiffany tried to steer the conversation towards safer topics. Communication techniques, boundary setting, theoretical frameworks. But the damage was done. Her followers, many of whom were present, had begun connecting the dots between her preaching and her practice. Next week's session will be particularly interesting, Martin commented as people began packing up. I hear Merle Green will be speaking about the legal aspects of modern relationships. Tiffany's head snapped up, real fear flashing across her features. What? Oh yes, Martin confirmed, gathering his things. She has some fascinating insights about documentation and consequences. Very relevant to our modern age of social media and digital footprints. As he left the community center, Martin noticed several participants huddled in small groups, phones out, presumably discussing the session's events in various social media groups. Dr. Bishop stood to the side, her professional mask slightly lifted to reveal genuine concern as she watched Tiffany attempt to maintain her composure while fielding questions from increasingly skeptical followers. Martin walked to his car. Through the community center's windows, he could see Tiffany's silhouette, slumped slightly as she gathered her materials. Her ring light, set up but never used during the workshop, cast a harsh glow that seemed to highlight every crack in her carefully constructed facade. The neighborhood barbecue buzzed with the easy energy of a late summer evening. Smoke from the grill drifted lazily across perfectly manicured lawns, carrying the promise of charred meat and comfortable suburban normalcy. Martin stood by the drink table, watching the scene unfold through the same analytical lens he'd applied to network security breaches for years. Tiffany moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her smile bright but brittle. Since the workshop incident, she'd doubled down on her public persona, as if sheer commitment to the performance could override the growing whispers in their social circle. Her hand brushed Ricky's arm as she passed, a touch too lingering to be casual, too deliberate to be innocent. From across the gathering, Merle caught Martin's eye. She stood with a group of their neighbors, her phone casually positioned to capture the increasingly bold interactions between their spouses. Her legal training showed in how she documented everything while appearing to do nothing at all. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, Holly murmured, appearing at Martin's elbow. She'd been one of the first to notice the changes in Tiffany, her long friendship giving her a front-row seat to the transformation. It's like they think your silence is permission. Martin took a slow sip of his drink. Sometimes people mistake patience for acceptance. Across the yard, Tiffany was holding court, expounding on the principles of modern relationships to a captive audience. Her voice carried clearly in the evening air. We have to move beyond these outdated concepts of possession and exclusivity. Love isn't finite. It expands when we let go of our conditioning. Ricky stood slightly behind her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. His wedding ring caught the light as he gestured, emphasizing Tiffany's points with the confidence of someone who thought they'd already won. Interesting perspective. Merle's voice cut, through the general murmur of agreement. She'd moved closer, her phone still casually recording, especially coming from someone who's been booking hotel rooms under false names. The conversation stuttered to a halt. Tiffany's smile froze, then recovered. I don't know what you're implying, Merle, but... Oh, I think you do. Merle's smile was razor-sharp. Just like you know exactly what you were doing at the Waterfront Hotel last Thursday, when you were supposed to be at your book club. The gathering had gone quiet, attention shifting to the unfolding drama. Even the grill's sizzle seemed muted, as if nature itself was holding its breath. This is hardly the place. Ricky started, but Merle cut him off. No, dear, this is exactly the place. Since you and Tiffany are so passionate about transparency and modern relationship paradigms, let's be transparent. She turned to address the gathered neighbors. Would anyone like to see some interesting camera footage from the gym parking lot? Or perhaps some credit card statements? Tiffany's composure finally cracked. She spun toward Martin, who still stood quietly by the drink table. You're not even angry or sad about any of this. Are you out of your mind? Martin set his drink down carefully. The moment he'd been building toward had arrived, and he found himself oddly calm. Why would I be angry? I've been too busy documenting everything. He pulled out his phone, fingers dancing across the screen. By the way, you remember Merle Green? Ricky's wife? She's my lawyer now. The color drained from Tiffany's face as Martin began swiping through his phone, displaying a carefully curated selection of evidence. Hotel receipts, text messages, surveillance footage, bank statements. Each piece of evidence was met with gasps and murmurs from their gathered neighbors. And trust me, he added, his voice carrying in the stunned silence, she's very motivated to handle our divorce case. The barbecue had become a tableau of shocked faces and hurriedly whispered conversations. Ricky had taken several steps back from Tiffany, his earlier confidence evaporating under his wife's triumphant glare. You've been documenting? Tiffany's voice cracked, her social media persona completely shattered. All this time? Every hotel meeting, Martin replied calmly, continuing to swipe through his phone. Every book club night that wasn't at Sandra's. Every gym session that mysteriously coincided with Ricky's schedule. Merle stepped forward, her own phone displaying a different set of evidence. The Waterfront Hotel seems to be a particular favorite. Though I must say, booking it under CrossFit business meeting wasn't very creative. The neighbors had formed a loose circle around them, smartphones discreetly recording the confrontation. Some of Tiffany's workshop regulars were present, their expressions shifting from shock to understanding as they connected the dots between her preaching and practice. You can't just... Ricky started, but Merle cut him off again. Can't what, dear? Document your affairs? Track your expenditures? Or are you referring to the ethics of surveillance? Because I'd love to have a discussion about ethics right now. Sandra, the actual book club host, pushed through the crowd. So that's why you stopped coming to our meetings? All those times I covered for you, thinking you were just busy with your new social media career. I can explain, Tiffany pleaded, looking around the circle of familiar faces. This isn't what it looks like. We were exploring modern relationship dynamics. Is that what we're calling it now? Holly interjected, her years of friendship evident in her hurt tone. Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like plain old cheating with a fancy new hashtag. Martin watched as Tiffany's carefully constructed world crumbled around her. Her phone buzzed continuously in her hand, likely notifications from followers who were already receiving clips of this confrontation from various guests. Your latest TikTok was about transparency in relationships, wasn't it? Martin asked, his voice carrying across the now silent gathering. About how true, ethical non-monogamy requires complete honesty from the start. Maybe you should make one about how to hide hotel receipts next. Ricky had backed completely away from Tiffany now, his eyes darting between his wife's triumphant expression and the damning evidence on her phone. Merle, we should discuss this privately. Oh, now you want privacy? Merle's laugh was sharp. That's not very aligned with the principles of modern relationship transparency, is it? The grill sizzled in the background, forgotten burgers beginning to char, someone's child called out from a nearby yard, the sound jarring against the tense atmosphere. Mrs. Chun stood at her property line, pruning shears in hand, watching the scene unfold with the same careful attention she gave her roses. I think, Martin said, pocketing his phone, that this would be a good time to end the barbecue. Tiffany, we can discuss the divorce proceedings tomorrow. I'm sure Merle can recommend a good lawyer for you, though you might want to find one who doesn't specialize in modern relationships. The gathering began to disperse, neighbors drifting away in small groups, phones clutched in hands, already beginning to spread the story through their community's gossip networks. Tiffany stood alone in the middle of the yard, her phone still buzzing with notifications, her carefully curated image of a modern relationship guru lying in ruins around her. You know what the irony is? Martin said quietly as he passed her. If you'd actually practiced what you preached about honesty and ethical behavior, we might have had a real conversation about opening our marriage. But I guess it's easier to talk about transparency on TikTok than to actually live it. He walked into their house, leaving Tiffany in the yard with the remnants of the barbecue. Overcooked food, abandoned drinks, and the ashes of her carefully constructed deception scattered in the evening breeze. Through the kitchen window, he could see Merle leading a shell-shocked Ricky to their car, her phone still recording every moment of his defeated retreat. In the growing darkness, Mrs. Chin's roses seemed to glow with an inner fire, their thorns sharp and ready, their blooms perfect and unashamed of their nature. Martin watched as she covered them for the night, each protective cloth placed with the same care she'd shown in pruning them. Some things, he reflected, were meant to be nurtured and protected. Others needed to be exposed to the harsh light of truth and left to wither on their own. The morning after the barbecue revelation, Tiffany's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Each notification sound marked another crack in her carefully constructed digital facade. She sat at her sister Amy's kitchen table, watching her follower count drop in real time as clips from the barbecue circulated through their cities' close-knit social media circles. You have to stop watching it, Amy said, gently trying to pry the phone from her sister's grip. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion. I can't. Tiffany's voice was hoarse, her usual polished appearance replaced by smeared makeup and yesterday's clothes. Do you know what they're saying about me? Amy glanced at the screen, wincing at the comments scrolling past. This you preaching about ethical non-monogamy while cheating on your husband? Thinking face. Talk about practicing what you don't preach face with tears of joy. Imagine using progressive relationship ideas to justify being unfaithful. You're why people don't take yin seriously. The local Modern Relationships Facebook group, where Tiffany had once been a respected voice, had exploded with discussion threads analyzing every aspect of her downfall. Her recent posts about breaking free from traditional constraints were being reshared with caustic commentary about the difference between ethical non-monogamy and plain old infidelity. Across town, Ricky Meade was facing his own crisis. His real estate office phone line blinked continuously as clients called to reconsider their options. His secretary, Jenny, placed another call on hold. Mr. Harrison wants to know if the rumors about your personal situation are true, Jenny reported, her professional tone barely masking her discomfort. He's concerned about how it might reflect on their development project. Ricky loosened his tie, watching another email notification pop up. Another client requesting to terminate their contract. His phone buzzed with a message from his biggest investor. Need to discuss optics. Lunch today. Meanwhile, in the same community that had watched Tiffany's live streams and attended her workshops, support was coalescing around Martin. Holly Palmer, who had witnessed the relationship's deterioration firsthand, posted a lengthy statement in a neighborhood Facebook group. As someone who's known Martin and Tiffany for years, I need to share something. Many of us covered for Tiffany, believing she was just busy with her new career. We watched her preach about honesty while lying to all of us. Martin's composure throughout this has been remarkable. Instead of lashing out, he let the truth speak for itself. The post garnered hundreds of reactions within hours. Comments poured in from neighbors and community members. Always knew something was off about her sudden interest in modern relationships. Martin handled this with such class. Remember when she used to judge others for traditional marriages? The irony. Iris Bray, another longtime friend, finally broke her silence with a private message to Martin. I should have told you sooner. The times Tiffany asked me to confirm her book club alibis. I'm so sorry. We all saw the signs, but didn't want to believe it. If you need anything, we're here for you. At his cybersecurity firm, Martin's colleagues rallied around him. His boss, David Chun, called him into his office mid-morning. "Take whatever time you need," David offered, closing the door for privacy. "Though I have to admit, the way you handle the documentation, very impressive. Very thorough. Just applying our security principles to a different kind of breach," Martin replied, managing a small smile. In her downtown law office, Merle Green was already preparing for the media fallout. Local news outlets had caught wind of the story. A social media relationship guru exposed for infidelity made for irresistible headlines. "We need to get ahead of this," she told her partner, Rebecca Torres. "I've already had 3 calls from reporters asking about the modern relationships scandal." Rebecca reviewed the evidence files on her tablet. "This is beyond thorough. The timestamps on these hotel receipts matching the book club meetings, the gym surveillance footage. Have you seen what's happening to his real estate business?" Merle's smile was sharp. Ricky always cared more about appearance than substance. Now he gets to learn about both. At the CrossFit gym where it had all started, the morning class buzzed with whispered conversations. The trainer, Jake, had to call for attention 3 times before people stopped discussing the scandal. "Anyone seen Ricky today?" someone asked during cool down. "Or Tiffany?" another voice added. "Guess they'll need to find a new gym," Jake muttered, erasing their names from the regular attendance board. Back at Amy's apartment, Tiffany finally put down her phone, her hands shaking. "My workshop regulars are demanding refunds. They're saying I defrauded them, teaching about ethical non-monogamy while cheating." Amy finished gently. "Tiff, what did you expect? You built your whole brand on authenticity and transparency." "I was going to tell Martin eventually," Tiffany whispered. "Once I figured out how to explain it. Once my following was bigger. Once you had a backup plan?" Amy's voice held no judgment, just sadness. "You know what's ironic? If you'd actually believed in all that modern relationship stuff you were preaching, you would have had the conversation with Martin first." Tiffany's phone buzzed again. An email from her workshop venue. "Due to recent events and community feedback, we need to discuss the future of your relationship workshop series. Multiple participants have expressed concerns about." She couldn't read further. Outside Amy's window, she could see people walking down the street, some pausing to glance at their phones, probably reading about her downfall in real time. The carefully curated image she'd built, the progressive relationship expert, the voice of modern love, was crumbling faster than she could track. "Ricky won't even answer my texts," she admitted, her voice small. "His wife, Merle, she's totally destroying him. His business. That's what happens when you build things on lies," Amy said, starting to clear away their untouched breakfast. "They look solid until someone shines a light on the foundation." Across the city, Martin sat in his office, watching his own phone light up with messages of support. Each notification represented another person choosing sides, another piece of his and Tiffany's shared social circle realigning itself in the aftermath of the revelation. Holly's message popped up, "Just saw Ricky at Starbucks. He looked terrible. Overheard him trying to convince a client not to pull their listing. Karma's not wasting any time." Martin closed the message without responding. Through his office window, he could see the city continuing its normal rhythm, unaware that in its social media spaces and private messages, a carefully constructed facade was crumbling, taking relationships, reputations, and businesses down with it. Merle Green's downtown office embodied the power its owner wielded. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city skyline, while the understated but expensive furnishings spoke of success earned through countless victories. Today, the large conference room hosted a meeting that would determine the future of 2 marriages. Dean Mejia, Tiffany's hastily retained lawyer, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. Before him lay a stack of documents that made his usual aggressive negotiation tactics seem futile. Across the polished mahogany table, Merle arranged her own files. "Let's begin," Merle announced, her voice carrying the confidence of someone holding all the cards. "Your client's social media presence makes this case particularly interesting, doesn't it?" The conference room's digital display flickered to life, showing a curated selection of Tiffany's recent posts about ethical non-monogamy and relationship transparency. Your client's posts about ethical non-monogamy become a lot less ethical when viewed alongside evidence of an affair that predates these discussions. Merle continued, clicking through to a timeline of hotel receipts and surveillance footage. Not to mention the timeline of her suggesting an open marriage only after being caught. Dean cleared his throat. My client was exploring modern relationship paradigms. There's a difference between... Between what? Merle interrupted, pulling up another document. Between preaching transparency while booking hotel rooms under false names? Between advocating for honest communication while lying to her husband? Please enlighten me. Martin sat quietly beside Merle, watching Tiffany across the table. His wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, had attempted to reconstruct her polished image for the meeting, but stress showed in the shadows under her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. The prenuptial agreement is quite clear about infidelity, Merle continued, sliding another document forward. Section 3.2 specifically addresses grounds for divorce and asset division in cases of proven adultery. Tiffany's lawyer flipped through the agreement, his frown deepening. My client is willing to discuss a reasonable settlement. Reasonable? Merle's laugh held no humor. Let's talk about reasonable. Your client built a social media career preaching about ethical relationship practices while actively deceiving her husband. She hosted workshops about honest communication while lying to her community. She used her platform to promote values she wasn't following. The display changed to show Tiffany's workshop advertisements, alongside evidence of her meetings with Ricky during the advertised times. The irony, Merle noted, is that she documented everything herself. Every post about relationship ethics, every video about transparency. They all timestamp her hypocrisy perfectly. Dean leaned over to whisper something to Tiffany, who shook her head sharply. We could argue that the relationship was already what? Merle cut in. Problematic? Because our documentation shows a happy marriage until your client began her affair. Would you like to see the credit card statements? The restaurant receipts? The gym surveillance footage? Martin watched as each piece of evidence appeared on the screen, each timestamp matching perfectly with Tiffany's lies about book club meetings and workout sessions. This isn't just about the divorce, Merle continued, her voice steady. This is about a systematic pattern of deception that extended beyond your client's marriage. She profited from teaching others about ethical behavior while actively engaging in unethical conduct. My workshop fees were minimal, Tiffany interjected, her first words since the meeting began. The fees aren't the issue, Martin spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. It's the hypocrisy. You weren't just lying to me. You were lying to everyone who trusted you to guide them through their own relationship challenges. Rebecca Torres, Merle's partner, entered the conference room with another stack of documents. The latest social media analytics, she announced, placing them before Merle. The community response continues to be significant. As you can see, Merle gestured to the new documents. Your client's actions have had far-reaching consequences. Her credibility in the community is destroyed. Her workshop participants are demanding refunds, and her social media following is rapidly declining. Dean Mejia attempted another intervention. Perhaps we could focus on the division of assets. Of course, Merle smiled, pulling out another file. Let's discuss the joint accounts, the house, and the investments. Given the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause and our extensive documentation, I think you'll find our terms quite definitive. As Merle detailed the proposed settlement, Martin observed the city through the window. From this height, he could see the community center where Tiffany had hosted her workshops, the gym where she'd met Ricky, the hotel where they'd conducted their affair. Each location now held a different meaning, marked by the evidence he and Merle had methodically gathered. Your client has until Friday to accept these terms, Merle concluded, sliding the proposal across the table. After that, we proceed to court, where every piece of evidence, every social media post, every workshop recording becomes public record. Tiffany's hands clenched in her lap. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Enjoying what? Merle's voice remained professional. Enforcing the consequences of your actions? Ensuring that my client receives a fair settlement? Or perhaps you mean enjoying the irony of using your own words about transparency and ethics against you. The conference room fell silent except for the soft hum of the digital display, still cycling through evidence of Tiffany's duplicity. Outside, the city continued its bustling pace, unaware of the lives being reshaped in this high-rise office. Take the time to review the terms, Merle advised, standing to end the meeting. But remember, every day you delay is another day for your followers, your workshop participants, and our community to discuss the difference between your preaching and your practice. As they filed out of the conference room, Martin caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window, tired but resolute, changed but unbroken. Below, life continued in the city they'd both called home, a city where their private drama had become a public lesson in the cost of deception. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Martin found himself seated at a corner table in the Skyline, the city's newest rooftop restaurant. The evening air carried the lingering warmth of late summer, and the setting sun painted the cityscape in hues of gold and purple. Across from him sat Caroline Daly, her book editor's keen eyes taking in both the view and her dinner companion. "You seem different tonight," Caroline observed, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "More at peace." Martin considered her words, appreciating how she didn't rush to fill silences with empty conversation. Since Merle had introduced them 2 months ago, he'd found Caroline's directness refreshing, a stark contrast to the carefully curated personas he'd grown accustomed to navigating. "The last of Tiffany's things were moved out yesterday," he shared. "Her sister came by to collect them. It's strange. I expected to feel something more watching the final traces of 13 years being packed into boxes." Caroline nodded, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes the real ending comes long before the physical one. By the time we're packing boxes, we're just going through motions. Below them, the city pulsed with evening energy. From their vantage point, Martin could see the community center where Tiffany had once held her workshops. The building now hosted different groups, the modern relationships sessions replaced by more traditional counseling services. "You know what I find interesting?" Caroline mused, looking out over the city lights. "How people use progressive ideas to justify selfish behavior. True ethical non-monogamy requires honesty from the start, not as a cover-up." The observation hit home. Through his work grapevine, Martin had heard about Tiffany's new life. She'd moved in with her sister after the divorce, her dreams of an exciting new life with Ricky shattered by reality. Her once vibrant social media presence had dwindled to occasional posts about personal growth and learning from mistakes, met with minimal engagement from her formerly devoted followers. "I heard Ricky relocated to Arizona," Caroline mentioned, her professional network keeping her informed of local gossip. Apparently, his real estate business here never recovered. Too many clients worried about their brands being associated with the scandal. Martin nodded, remembering the last time he'd seen Ricky, slipping out of a client meeting at the Starbucks below his office, shoulders hunched against the weight of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. Sometimes the most modern approach, Martin reflected, is simply being truthful about what you want. A warm breeze carried the sounds of the city up to their rooftop sanctuary. In the distance, the lights of office buildings began to twinkle on, including the window of Merle's law office. Their friendship had evolved in unexpected ways since the divorce. Weekly strategy sessions had transformed into regular coffee meetings. Two people bonded by shared experience and mutual respect. "How is Merle doing?" Caroline asked, as if reading his thoughts. "I heard her firm's been flooded with cases since your divorce made the local news." "Thriving," Martin smiled. "Apparently, there's a growing demand for lawyers who specialize in cases involving social media and digital evidence. She's even been asked to speak at legal conferences about it." The waiter approached with their dessert, a single tiramisu with 2 forks, a simple choice that felt significant in its lack of pretense. No carefully staged photos for social media, no performative speeches about modern dining habits. Just 2 people sharing a moment of genuine connection. "I've been thinking about writing a book," Caroline said after a comfortable silence, "about how social media affects modern relationships. Not just romantic ones, but all our connections. How we perform rather than participate." Martin considered this, remembering the countless hours he'd spent documenting his former life's collapse through screens and surveillance. "The evidence is everywhere," he said. "We're all leaving digital breadcrumbs of who we really are, Even while trying to show the world who we think we should be, Caroline leaned forward, her professional interest peaked. That's exactly it. The gap between performance and reality. Like how Tiffany used social media to build this persona of a relationship expert while her own marriage was falling apart. Would you feature our case in your book? Martin asked, curious rather than concerned. Only with your permission, Caroline assured him. Though it's a perfect example of how people can use progressive language to mask regressive behavior. Tiffany talked about ethical non-monogamy while behaving completely unethically. The city lights seemed to twinkle in agreement as darkness settled over the skyline. In one of those lit windows, Martin knew Tiffany was adjusting to her new reality in her sister's spare bedroom. The last time he'd heard anything about her, she'd been applying for administrative jobs. Her dreams of being a relationship guru buried under the weight of her exposed hypocrisy. I saw Mrs. Chin yesterday, Martin shared, thinking of their observant neighbor. Her roses are blooming again. She said sometimes gardens need a thorough pruning to grow back stronger. Caroline smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. The gesture was simple, honest. Everything his previous relationship had stopped being. Wise woman, your neighbor. As the evening drew to a close, they decided to walk home through the cooling night air. The city had a different energy after dark, more honest somehow, as if the shadows made it easier to be real. You know what's ironic? Martin mused as they walked. Tiffany was so focused on appearing evolved and modern that she missed the most basic truth. That real relationships, whether traditional or modern, are built on honesty. Caroline nodded, her hand comfortable in his. Sometimes the most radical act is simply being authentic. They passed the gym where it had all started, now under new management. Through the windows, people moved through their workouts, focused on their own journeys, unaware of the drama that had once unfolded in their midst. The night air carried the first hints of autumn, promising change and new beginnings. Martin thought about the path that had led him here, from discovery to documentation, from revelation to renewal. Each step, though painful, had brought him closer to something genuine. As they reached Caroline's building, the city seemed to hold its breath for a moment. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, a fitting backdrop to the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Martin had lost a wife but gained something more valuable, self-respect and the chance at authentic happiness. Coffee tomorrow? Caroline asked, her smile genuine in the fading light. I'd like that, Martin replied, appreciating the simple honesty of their connection. As Caroline squeezed his hand one last time before heading inside, Martin smiled, knowing that sometimes the most modern arrangement is simply being honest about who you are and what you want. Behind him, the city continued its eternal rhythm, its lights marking countless stories of endings and beginnings, each one a reminder that truth, though sometimes painful, was always the clearest path forward. Walking home alone, Martin felt lighter than he had in months. The weight of surveillance and documentation had been replaced by the simple pleasure of genuine connection. Above him, stars peeked through the city's light pollution, eternal witnesses to the endless cycle of human relationships, some false, some true, all part of the great dance of finding one's authentic self in a world of carefully curated performances. Epilogue, 5 years later. The book lined shelves of Caroline's home office as she put the finishing touches on her latest manuscript. The document's title page read, Digital Deception, How Social Media Transforms Modern Relationships by Caroline Daly Munoz. Below it sat the dedication, to Martin, who showed me that authenticity isn't just a buzzword. Hey, the car's here, Martin called from downstairs. We'll be late for Merle's book launch if we don't leave soon. Caroline saved her work and grabbed her jacket. Pausing to straighten the framed article on her wall, a piece from the city's major newspaper titled, Local Relationship Scandal Leads to Groundbreaking Book on Digital Age Infidelity. The story that had started as a local scandal had evolved into something much larger, spawning conversations about authenticity in the age of social media performance. In the car, Martin scrolled through his phone, showing Caroline the latest update from their old neighborhood's community page. Mrs. Chin's roses had won another local gardening competition, their beauty unchanged by the years of drama, they had witnessed. The comment section was filled with congratulations, but one particular exchange caught their attention. "Remember when these roses used to watch all that relationship drama unfold?" Grinning face with sweat. "You mean the famous TikTok relationship guru scandal? That feels like ages ago. My sister took one of those workshops. Still can't believe how it all turned out." Martin smiled, squeezing Caroline's hand. Their wedding ring designs were simple, a conscious choice that reflected their shared value of substance over show. After the spectacle of his previous marriage's collapse, they'd opted for a small ceremony in Mrs. Chen's garden, surrounded by her award-winning roses and genuine well-wishers. The car wound through downtown streets toward the city's premier bookstore where Merle was launching her own book, Digital Evidence, a modern attorney's guide to social media and divorce. The case that had ended 2 marriages had also launched her into national prominence as an expert in digital-age divorce law. As they approached the bookstore, they spotted a familiar face hurrying past. Amy, Tiffany's sister. She'd recently started her own counseling practice, specializing in helping people rebuild their lives after social media scandals. The experience of supporting her sister through her downfall had led her to an unexpected calling. Inside the bookstore, Merle's event was already drawing a crowd. Her reputation had grown far beyond their city. She now conducted workshops for law firms across the country about gathering digital evidence in modern divorce cases. The Munoz-Mar case study was always a central feature. "Speaking of case studies," Caroline murmured, nodding toward a side table where local news played silently on a mounted screen. A familiar face filled the display. Ricky Meade, their story's other antagonist, featured in a small piece about business failures. After relocating to Arizona, he'd attempted to rebuild his real estate empire, but his reputation had followed him through social media and Google searches. His latest venture, a mindfulness retreat center, had just filed for bankruptcy. "Did you see the latest about Tiffany?" Holly Palmer appeared beside them, now a successful relationship therapist herself. Her practice focused on helping couples navigate the real challenges of ethical non-monogamy. Actual ethical non-monogamy, she always emphasized, not the performative kind her former friend had preached. According to Holly, Tiffany had finally stopped trying to rebuild her social media presence after years of failed attempts. Her last public post, 3 years ago, had been a long reflection on authenticity and accountability, but it had come too late to salvage her reputation. She'd relocated to a small town in Oregon, working as an administrative assistant at a local community college. Her profile on their website made no mention of her past as a relationship guru. She tried dating apps for a while, Holly shared, lowering her voice despite the crowd's noise. But her digital footprint kept causing problems. Turns out when you Google Tiffany Munoz, you get quite a story. Merle took the small stage, commanding attention as easily as she did a courtroom. Her book's cover displayed on the screen behind her showed a shattered phone screen reflecting various social media icons. A powerful metaphor for how digital lives could crack under the weight of truth. 5 years ago, Merle began, "A case came across my desk that would change how we think about modern divorce." Her eyes found Martin and Caroline in the crowd, acknowledging their role in the story she was about to share. The audience listened intently as Merle described how social media had transformed not just how people conducted affairs, but how they were discovered and documented. She spoke about the irony of people using platforms meant for connection to facilitate deception, and how digital footprints made secrets harder than ever to keep. "The really interesting thing," Merle continued, "is how this case revealed a larger truth about our digital age. It's not just about catching cheaters. It's about the gap between who we pretend to be online and who we really are." In the years since the scandal, their story had become something of a cautionary tale in their city's social circles. The community center where Tiffany had once held her workshops now hosted a popular series on authentic relationships in the digital age, taught by Dr. Gail Bishop, who had witnessed the original confrontation. The fallout had rippled through their community in unexpected ways. Several of Tiffany's former workshop participants had formed a support group for people recovering from relationship deception, led by Iris Bray. The group's main message was simple: real ethical non-monogamy started with honesty, not performance. After Merle's presentation, the crowd mingled over wine and sophisticated hors d'oeuvres. Martin and Caroline found themselves in conversation with Rebecca Torres, Merle's law partner, who had helped document the original case. "Remember how worried we were about keeping all that surveillance legal?" Rebecca mused. "Now it's standard practice in our firm. Social media, security cameras, cloud storage. People leave digital evidence everywhere." "The real irony," Martin replied, "is how Tiffany's performance about transparency ended up making everything transparent in a way she never intended." Through the bookstore's window, they could see the city skyline silhouetted against the setting sun. Somewhere in Oregon, Tiffany was likely finishing another quiet day at her desk job, her dreams of influencer stardom long faded. In Arizona, Ricky was probably facing another day of financial struggles, his charismatic persona no longer enough to attract investors who could Google his name. "You know what's fascinating?" Caroline observed, her editor's mind always working. "How karma plays out differently in the digital age. It's not just about actions having consequences anymore. It's about those consequences being permanently searchable." Martin nodded, remembering the long journey from suspicion to documentation to revelation. The security cameras he'd installed had long since been removed, their purpose served. Now, their home security system was simple, standard, no need for extra surveillance when you trusted your partner. Later that evening, as they walked home through familiar streets, they passed the gym where it had all started. It had been rebranded years ago, the space now hosting a successful yoga studio. The owner had even hired Amy as their in-house counselor, turning the site of deception into a place of genuine healing. "Sometimes I wonder," Martin mused, "if Tiffany ever found what she was looking for. All that talk about modern relationships and breaking free. Maybe she really was searching for something." "The tragedy," Caroline replied, her hand warm in his, "is that she was so focused on appearing evolved that she missed the chance to actually evolve." They stopped at a corner cafe, not the one where Martin and Merle had first plotted their documentation strategy, but a new place, untouched by old memories. Through the window, they could see couples and families, some on their phones, others engaged in direct conversation. Each table held its own story, its own potential for truth or deception. "I finished the epilogue today," Caroline mentioned as they waited for their coffee. "The publisher thinks the book could help people understand how social media affects modern relationships." "What's the main takeaway?" Martin asked, though he already knew the answer. "That authenticity isn't about what you show the world," Caroline smiled. "It's about being honest about who you are, even when no one's watching." As they walked the final blocks home, the city settled into its evening rhythm. Somewhere in their old neighborhood, Mrs. Chun was probably tending to her roses, their blooms still witnessing the endless dance of human relationships. The roses had seen it all: the deception, the documentation, the revelation, and finally the healing. 5 years had transformed their story from a local scandal into a broader lesson about truth in the digital age. Tiffany's carefully constructed image had crumbled, Ricky's business empire had fallen, but something real had grown from the ruins. Genuine relationships, authentic connections, and the understanding that no amount of social media performance could substitute for simple honesty. Their house key turned in the lock, a simple sound that meant home and truth and trust. Inside, their living room held no ring lights, no carefully curated backgrounds for live streams. Just books, comfortable furniture, and framed photos of genuine moments. Their wedding in Mrs. Chen's garden, coffee meetings with Merle, holiday gatherings with honest friends. "You know what's funny?" Martin said as they settled into their evening routine. "Tiffany always talked about breaking free from traditional constraints, but she ended up more constrained than ever by her own deception." Caroline nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Sometimes the most radical act is simply being yourself." Outside, the city continued its eternal rhythm, its lights marking countless stories of truth and deception, performance and authenticity. Somewhere in Oregon, Tiffany was probably checking her private social media one last time, her public accounts long abandoned. In Arizona, Ricky was likely planning his next business reinvention, each attempt haunted by his searchable past. And in their old neighborhood, Mrs. Chen's roses bloomed on, indifferent to human drama, teaching their quiet lesson about natural beauty and authentic growth. The night settled around their home like a comfortable blanket, bringing with it the peace that comes from living without performance. Their story had become part of the city's fabric, a modern fable about truth in the age of carefully curated lies. But more than that, it had become a testament to the enduring power of authenticity, how it could survive scandal, support healing, and ultimately lead to something real. As they prepared for bed, Martin's phone buzzed one last time, a message from Merle thanking them for attending her book launch. The former attorney-client relationship had blossomed into a genuine friendship, proving that sometimes the best connections grow from the ashes of deception. "Ready for tomorrow?" Caroline asked, knowing they had breakfast plans with Holly and Iris, friends who had proven their loyalty during the darkest days of the scandal. "Always," Martin replied, setting his phone aside. In their quiet bedroom, far from the performative chaos of their past, they had found what Tiffany had claimed to seek but never understood: a truly modern relationship, built not on social media presentations or carefully crafted images, but on the simple, revolutionary act of being genuinely themselves. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.